Hello, everyone, and welcome to Political Frenemies. And if you're new to us, let me tell you that we're the podcast where a Liberal Democrat and a Conservative, with often really rather different views on the world and on politics, debate the issues, but still remain friends afterwards. How's about that? Some might call it grown-up politics, but see what you think. I'm Mathew Hulbert. I'm a Liberal Democrat activist and a former Lib Dem councillor too. And joining me, as always, is Dr. Chris Newton, who is an academic and a former Conservative advisor on defence policy the last time the Tories were in opposition. Hello, Chris.
Hello, Matthew. Yes. First of all, I think both of us would like to extend our thanks to Peter Cardwell for appearing in last week's episode and for giving us a very lengthy interview. It was a really fascinating interview. He talked a lot about his career, his interview with Keir Starmer, and we talked a lot about the week's news as well, and Keir Starmer's situation in particular. If you haven't watched that interview or listened to that interview so far, by all means go back and watch it, because it was a really good episode. Peter's always very good value, and we had quite a good-natured but robust debate as well, I think.
Yeah, we absolutely did. But yeah, Peter's great. And, as he said himself, certainly me and him, and obviously you agree with him on quite a lot, Chris, but politically, me and him are very different. But rather like with yourself, Chris, I'm not one of these people who thinks that you can't be friends with people with different politics. I just think that is silly. But Peter's a great guy. Very engaging, very warm. The kind of warmth kind of comes through the screen to you, which it doesn't always with people. So I thought it was, even if I say so myself, Chris, I thought we did a good interview, and he was fantastic with his time. So yeah, definitely, folks, if you're watching and listening to this and haven't yet heard or seen that, then go back on YouTube or go back on wherever you get the podcast. And do have a watch and a listen to that, because it's well worth it. And he has some exclusive information for us as well that was just for Political Frenemies. So we won't tell you what that was. You can go back and watch it.
Yeah, exclusive information. We covered quite a lot. I thought he was very frank about not just Keir Starmer, but also Kemi Badenoch as well. We had very strong opinions about Kemi Badenoch. And reform as well.
And Lib Dems.
Yeah. So yes, please, if you haven't done so already, worth watching, worth listening, and if you like it, do give us a like as well.
Absolutely, and we'll talk about all the internety things before the end of the podcast. Now, can I just say, in case people are a little bit worried when I'm put up my glasses, I have been a bit in the wars today. Now, I had to have a blood test. And for some reason, Chris, I can honestly say that, I am definitely alive, but sometimes I wonder whether I'm not, because they can never find a vein. When I have to have a blood test, they can never find a vein, and I don't know why it is. I just really don't know why it is. But anyway, so I had to have it. They tried in my arm, and nothing was happening, so I had to have it in my hand, which was very painful, but it was over and done within about 30 seconds. So so if people are wondering what that is, that's what it was. Do you want people worrying?
No, of course not. But it's good. It's good to see that it's nothing serious or anything like that. But
no, nothing like that. And I've scooted, rather like when we recorded with Peter on Sunday. I've scooted back from being elsewhere today. So I went to Birmingham, and I saw my sister, who is she doesn't live in the UK, but she's over here at the moment. And I saw my nephew, who I've not seen for really quite a long time. So a lovely family day, Chris. So I'm all full of the joys of spring this afternoon.
Yeah, and it's a lovely day, lovely weather. We're in a heat, in the middle of a massive heat wave at the moment. If this is climate change, then I have no complaints.
No, don't start with
the
that.
Algorithm. That was a joke for the algorithm, because we might get struck for that. But
Don't start with me on that yet, Chris. But it really has been quite a week, hasn't it? And I know that both me and you, Chris, will have quite strong views on this, and that we might just even agree with some of what we're about to say. So and yes, folks, it is all about Keir Starmer this week.
Yeah, it's a very dramatic week, and Keir Starmer has had his troubles both at home and dealing with stuff abroad as well. So he's had a lot of items on his agenda, and he's had quite the week, and we'll be discussing the implications, especially of his welfare U-turn, but on his policies going forward, and on his leadership as well, because there is talk that there could be implications for Starmer's leadership, maybe not in the immediate term, but certainly in the short to medium term, I would suggest.
Well, I've had something to say about that online this week, so we'll get to that. But shall we do it, Chris?
Yeah, let's go.
So, yeah, we're going to start with Labour's week, and of course, because they, not just because they're the government, but they really have dominated the week this week. And obviously the main thing, Chris, has been the whole issue of welfare reform, and this bill that is going to be voted on, we believe, on Tuesday in the House of Commons. And exactly what Labour was going to do, because obviously we saw this reasoned amendment, as it's called, put down by a Labour MP that had more than, I believe in the end, more than 120 signatures. Not all Labour, there were some of Northern Irish MPs, I think, as well, but majority Labour. And that would have been enough, I believe, to have seen the government defeated if all the other opposition parties voted against it. So this was a really serious issue for Keir Starmer, and a number of things happened throughout the week that we'll get to. But in terms of your headline view, Chris, of the week, how do you see it?
Yeah, and just following on from what Peter said last week about sort of Keir Starmer, almost this time last year, he was in massively sort of strong position, 170 seat majority. He he seemed to be in a very powerful position, but now facing a situation where less than a year into that government, he's facing a rebellion. We faced a rebellion that risked defeating a key part of Labour's policy agenda and economic policy. It's just extraordinary, and just illustrates a number of aspects with the Starmer leadership. I mean, firstly, again, the U-turn, the partial U-turn that he announced. I think it was yesterday, wasn't it? And not completely going through with all of the welfare cuts that Starmer made. Again, just illustrates that Starmer can easily be pushed around, that he flip-flops, that you don't know where he stands, you don't know what he believes, he changes his mind all the time, and it also illustrates poor political judgment as well, believing that this can the original proposal can go through, and then not really sort of knowing what his party thought about it, and that illustrates another problem actually with regards to the relations with his party as well. He's now not seemed to be particularly strong within his party. His party's openly, or a sizable chunk of his parliamentary party is rebelling against him, and it just shows that also that this whole McSweeney sort of modernisation project, as well, firstly, Starmer doesn't have. We don't know whether Starmer really believes in it or not. As secondly, Starmer clearly doesn't have the authority to deliver it within his party, but also it also represents that this parliamentary Labour Party is a pretty radical parliamentary Labour Party, as was illustrated with the votes on abortion and assisted dying. So any kind of modernisation project is gonna derail as we're
Well,
seeing.
well, just on that, Chris, on that final point. I mean, I think people from just about all the parties supported both of those things. So, I mean, it wasn't just a Labour thing, was it? Assisted dying and the changes around abortion. I think MPs from I think almost all the parties, if not quite all, I don't know about Reform, but I think almost all the parties supported both of those things.
Well,
So they weren't just Labour
you have
things,
a
were
size
they?
of, well, you have a lot of Labour, Lib Dem, SNP MPs in there. So yes, that's going to reflect.
And the Tories.
Yeah, there's Tories, and indeed there was a couple of Reform UK MPs as well. But it does represent a very socially liberal parliament, regardless of what you
At
think.
least, well, I mean, at least in regards to those things, I think there are some other issues, including some LGBT plus stuff, where it's really not as liberal as I'd like to see it. But yes, I mean, I certainly said on social media that I thought, certainly in regards to those two issues, that it was probably the most liberal parliament since I think Roy Jenkins was the Home Secretary and famously liberalised a number of things back in the 60s and 70s. So yeah, absolutely, I agree. But going back to your prior points, I mean, I think there's a number of things to talk about, and perhaps we can talk about them in turn. But I just wanted to ask you first on your first point: was the mistake that Starmer made the reversing that we've seen this week, or was the mistake, as I think, announcing the plans like in the way he did in the first place, or were they both mistakes?
I think, I mean, if you look at how big the welfare bill is, and if you look at there's a clear need to get public spending under control, given the amount of debt we're in, and so forth. There's certainly the welfare bill needed to be looked at. Now, there's an argument about whether Labour did it sensitively, whether they did it sensibly, whether they could have done it differently. And probably their mistake is not actually because they very much rushed into this, as they rushed into their economic policy overall.
There was no real consultation, was there, about it? It was just announced. And what I've read today, and I don't know how true this is, but what I've read was that it was something that I think the overall issue is, Chris, and I don't think you'll disagree with me on this at all, is that this government didn't seem to come in to power with any great plan for what it wanted to do with power. And I think as a result of that, I think the Treasury kind of decided that it wanted to do this, and there was no internal opposition, and then it was announced, and suddenly then all hell broke loose. And I'm certainly not the first person to say it this week, but I think because there's no underlying great kind of philosophical or ideological position underpinning this government, the Treasury and Rachel Reeves were able, if I can put it this way, to kind of get away with that, and there was no pushback from Starmer or anyone else.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think it's combined with the fact that we have what seems to be very poor caliber of ministers as well, and the Treasury would absolutely love having this Labour government, because it just seems that the Treasury are getting their way on a lot of issues, and they're getting a lot of their sort of pet policies through ministers, and ministers don't seem to be asking questions, don't seem to be scrutinizing what's being put forward to them as well. So it's a failure of both vision and a failure of the capability of the personnel as well. So I think I would agree with you on that element. On the substantial, I think I'll come to Keir Starmer's overall leadership in a minute, but just on the actual policy of that was announced. Now I would I would expect nothing less than you to welcome the U-turn, and you're
Doesn't go
very
far enough as far
very
as I'm concerned.
doesn't go support. But would
Doesn't go
you
far enough.
accept that, you know, given that I think the welfare bill is, you know, is close to 300 billion, would you not accept that there, you know, that there is a case for some cuts in welfare, and that, you know, people do cheat the system? I'm not saying everybody cheats the system, but there are people who cheat the system, and perhaps some of the definitions with regards to, you know, some of the recipients, particularly in relation to mental health. Now, I'm not sort of downplaying mental health, but it is strange that we are one of the highest countries in terms of claimants on mental health, and maybe perhaps our definition is a bit broader than perhaps other countries. Do you not see that there is a case there to at least look at some of these things? Yes, to do it in a compassionate way, and not to scare people who genuinely need the disability and mental health benefits and other form of benefits as well. But do you not see that there is a case there to bring the welfare bill under some form of control?
Look, I think that there are definitely those, you know, no doubt about this at all. I wouldn't seek to deny it. There are definitely those who try and play the system, and, you know, those people shouldn't be allowed to do so. And of course, there has to be a way to get those people off benefits if they're not, if they shouldn't be claiming them, and back into work. No doubt about that at all. So that's the first thing. But secondly, what I've not liked, and I've really not liked this week, is that government spokespeople on TV and radio consistently have tried to portray PIP as if it is a benefit purely for people out of work. It's not. And we know that a lot of PIP claimants are people in work, but the PIP payments enable them to pay for, you know, wheelchairs, etc., 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 to enable them to carry on working. And I don't like the portrayal that this is, you know, just a situation for people who are not in work. And then it doesn't even need to be said. You can almost hear implicitly that what they're wanting the general public to think is, oh, these are people that, you know, I mean, I don't even like saying it myself because I hate this rhetoric, but oh, these are scroungers, or these are in some way people that are undeserving, or whatever it is. And I don't think in the vast majority of cases that is the case. Not saying not some, where there's people trying to game the system and they need to be dealt with appropriately. But I think in the vast majority of cases, people claim these payments because they're deserving of them, and they help a lot of people stay in work. And I don't think that is referenced enough by government ministers, and especially by the DWP secretary, Liz Kendall, who, you know, she's an MP from up my way. She's a Leicester MP, but I just think, I don't know her personally, so this isn't a personal thing. But no, I was just going to say, Chris, that this isn't a personal thing. But I mean, I just think she's dreadful as a DWP secretary. I think she's awful.
And considering that she was one of the bright stars at one point of the Labour Party as well, and she almost, well, she didn't almost become leader, but she was considered as like the Blairite.
She very much didn't almost become leader.
But she was like the Blairite sensible candidate at one stage. But
don't you think that is what? But Chris, just on that, sorry, don't you think that is why Starmer put her in that position, because she'd be tough on welfare in inverted commas? And instead of putting someone in, maybe a soft left person, maybe someone who accepted that we need to get the welfare bill down, who accepted that we need to deal with people who are claiming when they shouldn't, but also, and as you yourself have quite rightly said in this podcast, Chris, who also recognises that for the vast majority of people who are properly claiming, we need to have compassion. We need to have a compassionate policy. Instead, he put someone in who he knew would be portrayed as, and in reality seems to be, it's not just a portrayal thing, tough. And it's okay being tough. Yeah, that's fine. But if you won't do the compassionate bit as well, there'll be trouble.
Yeah, although I mean, potentially, he kind of like, because he doesn't know what he's doing. Basically, Starmer,
Right.
He's like he's playing up to certain things without really sort of thinking things through. But in terms of your point, I mean, surely we're capable of having a kind of a nuanced debate here about, yes, we need to show compassion to those who genuinely need it, but we do need to have an honest conversation about abuses and things like that. I mean, surely people are allowed to say, well, there are abuses. I can see abuses in my own kind of life. People.
But do you think? But Chris, do you think? Because I've accepted that in what I've just said. But do you think? I think you think it's a bigger problem than I think it is.
I think, well, regardless of whether it's a big problem or not, it doesn't mean just because it's a small problem, it doesn't mean it shouldn't be dealt with. It is a problem. Right. It is a problem. It might seem a big. I mean, I don't know the figures off the top of my head, but it might seem a big problem because it's something that working class people see in their daily lives. So it's the same with him, with immigration. It might seem bigger to a certain sector of the population than the overall figures would suggest, because they're the ones at the sharp end of it, right? They're the ones that's seeing it. Where people who live in sort of sheltered, sort of middle class communities don't necessarily see it in the way in which working class people do. And that's what I wish people from the Westminster Village would understand, in that sense. People, when they say it, they're not saying these things out of nothing. They're saying it based on their sort of daily experiences and what we're seeing, and they should be able to say it, and we should be able to have an adult grown-up conversation about it without people smearing them as heartless, or as they don't care, or whatever. They're just voicing the concern that they're seeing in their everyday lives.
But do you accept, Chris, then, that there's two things which are wrong rhetorically here? That there's what you've just said, which I accept, that people are raising, that a lot of people, not all, because I think some people do try and make this a political football, and it's all about the politics for them rather than the policy. But I think there's a lot of people who, I agree with you, raise this because they see it in their everyday lives and think it's a concern. That's fine. But do you also accept, Chris, there's rhetoric of scroungers and all of this, which is equally as unhelpful?
Yeah. Again, we should have have compassion to those who genuinely sort of believe it. I do think people who cheat the system and who potentially deny genuine people from receiving benefits, or put the pressure on the budget, I think they should be called out for it. I don't know whether that's language that I would use, but I think people should be entitled to call, because it's not a nice thing, right? And it's not a good, decent thing. So people should be able to strongly call out people who are genuinely cheating the system.
Well, let me ask you this then, Chris. For those people, and I certainly would like to think, I mean, maybe naively, but I certainly would like to think that it's a minority. But it's probably still a sizable minority, because we're talking about a lot of people here. So for those people that are playing the system, and especially when you and I've seen this, in families, I grew up in a working class area, still think of myself as proudly working class, and I've seen multi-generational worklessness, and I mean, I always think that is a failure, not just of it's not just kind of a personal failure for those people. I think it's a failure of government policy. I think it's a failure of society, because actually at work, and we can talk about the fact that it's not always good paid work and all of that is involved in this, and we shouldn't pretend it's not. But work gives you pride, it gives you dignity, it gives you a reason to get up in the morning. etc., etc. We all know the benefits. So, I mean, how do you think and this is going back over governments of all political colours, including when my lot were part of government. Why do you think it is that no one has been able to tackle this issue? I don't even know if I like the word tackle, to be honest, but deal with this issue. And that when they try to, as with in this case, it's done in such a fudge way that it doesn't work. I mean, why do you think that down the years, down the decades, it's not been sorted out?
Maybe because when someone tries to do something about it, there's an outcry. Maybe that's one aspect to do it. I think also a lot of it is to do with education as well. I think one of the things that we haven't been good at in terms of education is technical education. For some reason, and again, it's an issue which governments of successive governments have tried to tackle, but for some reason, the technical education is still not as valued as academic education. And I think if we can restore technical education and give a genuine pathway which is seen as equal to academic, and the sort of blue, so the white collar professions, then maybe that is you would head towards a good part of the solution. But again, governments who try to tackle this issue, they've got to be given a chance to do it as well. And again, so with this government, the first thing that they try, and there's an outcry, and now they're U-turning, and I mean that might be a problem as well. Before we move on to the next party, can I also address so what does this mean for Labour? What does this mean? I mean, their economic policy is in tatters now. I mean, this adds, a more, an extra, I think an extra 1.5 billion. Again, Rachel Reeves is going to have to rewrite her economic policy. They keep denying that there's going to be tax rises when everybody knows there's going to be tax rises. But also this says a lot about the leadership of Starmer as well. Again, another flip-flop. He also U-turned today on Friday at the day of this recording on his Island of Strangers speech. He said, "Oh, he shouldn't have done it. He regrets saying it now," even though he bloody well said it, And again, it just shows that he's political antenna is absolutely atrocious. He also couldn't, for some bizarre reason, come up with a definitive stance on the US strikes on Iran as well. Just seemed absolutely odd and bizarre.
And by the way, I mean, it's more important to him because he's the Prime Minister, but I've been critical of and we'll get to the Lib Dems later on, but I've been critical of my party this week because you would expect them, I certainly would have expected my party leadership to come out and say that they were against the strikes, and they didn't, but they also didn't say that they agree with them. So I think there were a number of people and parties who weren't clear of their view on that.
Yeah, but no, I would agree with that. But in terms of Starmer, would you say that this is the beginning of the end? I mean, we talked about him perhaps resigning next year or being booted out next year. Is that now more of a possibility, or could it be even sooner than that?
I do think it's a possibility. And I wrote this week, a little plug here, Chris. I wrote this week on my relaunch Substack. You can find it, folks. Just Google it. If you'd have asked me a few months back, was it particularly likely that there'd be any kind of coup from within the Labour ranks against Keir Starmer? I would have thought it very unlikely. I've now come to the conclusion that, I mean, this doesn't mean it will happen, of course, because political parties don't always do what perhaps they should, but in my view, I think it should happen. Now, the question is, who on earth would he potentially hand over to? I mean, or who on earth could challenge? There clearly are people in Labour who might do that, but whether they be felt by the rest of the Labour Party that they do a better job is open to question. But I do think that I'm afraid to say, because even as someone from a different party, I had quite high hopes for this government. You probably didn't, Chris, but I did. I like to think this time almost a year ago that some adults were back in charge, and although I think in some respects they're better than the Tory government they replaced, in other respects I think they're just as bad. In other respects I think they're just as bad, if not worse. Worse for the fact that I would have higher hopes for this government, perhaps wrongly. But I think Starmer's credibility is shot. And as much as I called for him to U-turn on this, I did make my headline to my Substack bit was that he should U-turn and then face the fiscal consequences, because there was no easy way out for him on this. He either ploughed on and potentially lost a vote, which would have clearly have been very, very bad for him, or he did what he's done and kind of partially U-turned, but not really, changes that are good enough for some in Labour, but changes that still don't go far enough for others. So it's a complete hodgepodge, and none of us know whether he's going to be successful next week or not. Or he got it through with Tory votes, which again would have been devastating for him. That would have been really embarrassing, and may yet still happen, although probably not likely now. Or I don't know. I mean, all of the options were bad for him. And to get yourself in a position, Chris, and I know you'll agree with me on this, but for a prime minister less than a year in to be in a position where at a NATO summit he's having to deny that he won't be out of the job in a week's time, and for Number 10 Downing Street to having to deny that the whips aren't saying that it's a confidence vote when a number of Labour MPs have been told that it is a confidence vote. I mean, the whole thing was a complete and utter shambles. And I mean, I didn't think that we'd see anything ever again, Chris, that was in any way comparable to the Liz Truss month and a bit. But this is pretty damn close. I mean, this is government as chaos, and I wonder how long the markets and others are going to put up with this before something really serious happens.
Yeah, and again, I mean, the guilt the gilt rates are higher than the Truss when it was under the Truss budget, and Starmer has had a lot of leeway from the markets and from the establishment, because I think they're sympathetic towards his policies, but there's only a certain amount of time where you can deny reality, and the fact of the matter is, from the budget onwards, quite a few of us were saying that this was unsustainable, and that's proven to be the case, and also there were real signs when he was leader of the opposition that it would end this way as well. I mean, the amount of times that he flip-flopped over issues, especially COVID. I mean, Boris was right when he called him Captain Hindsight, right? Especially over the Iran thing. Is that when the US strikes first happens, there was total silence for him. Now they're kind of edging towards, it's the US has done what they did, and they've secured. They've destroyed Iran's nuclear capability. Again, you can get away with being Captain Hindsight when you're leader of the opposition and you have a very favourable media with you. You can't do that on the international stage. You as the leader of the United Kingdom, a key power in the world, you need a definitive stance, and he didn't deliver that at all.
No, and Chris, I mean, I wonder if you have any more idea than I do. I mean, what is Starmerism? I mean, what is it? Do you have any clue as to what Starmerism is? We knew what Blairism was. You can either agree with it or not. We knew what Thatcherism was. You can either agree with it or not. I think with some of the latter Tory prime ministers, it's also difficult to know quite what they stood for. But with Starmer, I have no clue what his ideological underpinnings are, and I think that's important.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's no evidence of that in terms of the way he governs, but I think I mean, if you look at Peter Hitchens, has written some stuff, and he argues, he claims that Starmer had quite a radical sort of early life before as a
And has
lawyer.
drifted rightwards or what?
No, leftwards. He was very, very, very sorry?
No, but I mean, has drifted rightwards since then, do you mean?
Yeah, well, that's how he's presented himself. Whether or not in reality he's actually like that, I think the only thing you can really define sort of Starmerism by is the fact that he seems to place international institutions and international law ahead of the British national interest, and that was illustrated with his Chagos still, with the way in which he negotiates, where he seems to give away everything without any kind of real concession as well. That's Starmerism, and the the real the technocratic lawyer. That's who Starmer is. But there is an element of pragmatism there, but he doesn't have a clue what he's doing, which illustrates the various U-turns.
And I just want to ask you, we will get onto the other parties shortly, which I think we can whiz through, because I think the main thing has been Labour this week, let's be honest. But so there's been talk over the past day or so that some Labour, I don't know how true this is, but that some Labour MPs are saying that for them to vote for this legislation, there needs to be changes to the operation at number 10 Downing Street. But I've also heard other people claim that there's no Keir Starmer without Morgan McSweeney, and that therefore his chief of staff, Morgan McSweeney, isn't going anywhere. Do you think Starmer might throw his lifeline under the bus to carry on in Downing Street?
Didn't they say exactly the same thing about Sue Gray?
Well, quite.
And then she went. I think Starmer would do absolutely anything to save his skin. So and what's the point of him if the parliamentary party rejects his agenda? So I think that's. I mean, I think anything's possible, and I think Rachel Reeves also comes under that.
Well, indeed.
Well.
So me and you, Chris, have been saying. Well, I've certainly been saying on this podcast for a number of months now that if Labour is going to turn this around, it needs to start happening soon. And if anything, it's got worse since then. Yeah. So I mean, I think they're only fortunate, and we're going to come on to the Tories a little bit later on. But I think the only thing that goes in Starmer and Labour's favour is that at the moment the primary opposition, which is still officially the Conservatives, are also in a bit of a mess, and we'll get to them shortly. But beyond that, I can't remember, short of the Liz Truss era, a more dire situation for a prime minister. Can you?
Yeah, this is like, remember before 97, sort of the Tories like put out warnings about what the Labour government would be like, and initially the Labour government wasn't like that, because Gordon Brown ultimately stuck to Tory spending plans, and they presented themselves. They were sensible, they were restrained,
and they did have a vision. New Labour. I mean, you can like it or not, but they had a vision.
Whereas this government is precisely what the Tories warned about. So all of the nightmares about taxing and spending and so forth, and not having any restraint whatsoever. So I can't recall a government, and I mean a government that's just come into power via an election, that has been this disastrous this quickly.
And so do you think that there will be, can you conceive of a challenge from either the Blairite right, so West Streeting, etc., or the soft left, Angela Rayner and others? Because I think it would need to come from either of those two to be seen as credible. I'm afraid it coming from the actual kind of harder left, I don't think is feasible. But could you conceive of a challenge if it continues to go this badly into next year?
Yeah, I mean, if the view is that this is, which I think we're in this territory already, that this is absolutely tarnishing the Labour brand, just like the final years of incompetence absolutely tarnished the Tory brand, where Labour actually sees this as, well, this is actually quite as essential, and we're also handing reform the next election on the plate as well. So yes, if it continues like this, and there's no indication that things are going to improve, then I wouldn't be surprised if there isn't some form of challenge.
Well, let's move on to reform then, Chris, shall we? I mean, I guess we could spend the whole thing on Labour, but we'd best not do that. I mean, not much from reform really this week, but there was this one policy, the Britannia Card, which they tried to spin in quite a clever way. They tried to say, look, yeah, I mean, I know that people might not necessarily like the idea of non-doms in the UK and all of that, but actually we're going to do it this way, which actually it'll give kind of, ordinary people, working class people, a significant amount of money in their pocket, and so therefore that'll outweigh the fact that people don't like the idea of non-doms. But do you think it worked for them, Chris?
I think as a policy, I think what you need to do is to, you'd rather have the money than not have the money. And if you can think of a way in which you can incentivize the very richest to come here, invest in this country, provide jobs for people, then you've got to explore and look at ways to do that. Because the reality is that if you've got the choice to go anywhere that you want in the world, then you take that effectively.
But these people should be paying their way, shouldn't they? They should be properly paying British taxes.
Well, this is the way of getting them to at least contribute, right? And as I said, at the end of the day, I mean, you can try and tax them in the way in which Labour is trying to do at the moment. But if they're not, if they've left here completely, then you're not going to get any tax, and you're not going to get that money for any services. So you've got to work out a way in which you're going to do it. This is living in the real world, as opposed there's the world that we'd like it to be, and there's the world that as it is, and the reality is that the rich has the luxury to travel wherever they want. So,
hey Chris, I'd tax them till the pips squeak. You know me.
But what use would that be? What they use? You get zero money for the NHS and for all of the lovely stuff that you want to spend that money on. So,
well, you know as well as I do
about these things.
You know as well as I do, Chris, and it's an argument that I've used on Talk TV, so it's not original here. But I always reference the group on Twitter that are the patriotic millionaires who are exactly that. They say that they want to be taxed a bit more, that they know that they're very well off, that they've been very fortunate, that they've worked very hard, many of them. But they appreciate the public services that they know that even if not them particularly, the vast majority of people in this country have to use, and that they say tax them a bit more. That's what they say, and they're my favourite kind of millionaires, patriotic.
Well, they might have a stronger case if we actually had decent public services, and that there's actually efficiency in the way in which the state spends the money. We don't have that. Their case is
because of successive Tory governments. That's why we don't have it.
Oh God, dear. What the Tory government that spent that pretty much every year they spent more and more in the NHS, and where public expenditure is increased, and even though public expenditure is increased, the services are still shit. So. Well,
that's the view of Chris Newton, folks. It's not necessarily the view of me or our podcast as a whole. So reform then. Do you think that with this policy, they're again trying to do this thing that they seem to be doing at the moment, which is this left-right thing? The right bit is, yeah, you might not like the fact that it's non-doms, but we're going to put money back in your pocket, and you do like that.
I think there is a practical element of that. I think one of the things that Farage might be concerned about is the fact that not just the very rich, but young, sort of very talented young people, or very, very talented people altogether, are leaving the country and going to places like Dubai, Texas, California, those kind of places. And that's why, for example, Farage is talking about Bitcoin, even though it might not be an interest to me, you, to our viewers and listeners. You know, a lot of people in that sect are interested in that kind of thing. So I think if we want to be a prosperous country, then we need to keep the talent, the very talented in this country. So I think what these policies, the stuff on Bitcoin and this policy here is providing incentives to attract talent, but also keep British talent in this country as well. And I think that's a perfectly sensible thing to want, isn't it, Mathew?
He phrased that to try and trap me, folks. Did you notice that? But what I'll just swerve that and ask you a question instead, Chris, on about young people and potentially talented young people, although we'll have to wait and see very much about that. The other kind of big thing, at least on social media for reform this week, has been the fact that we now have the youngest ever leader of a principal authority in the UK. This is because I don't pretend to know why the leader of Warwickshire County Council stood down after just a few weeks, but anyway, we'll await that. But anyway, he has, and that meant that the deputy leader, the reformed deputy leader of Warwickshire County Council, is now the acting leader, at least until next week, and he is 18 years old. Now, there's been a lot of discussion of this on Twitter, with a lot of people saying, how on earth can an 18-year-old, run a multi-million-pound local authority and deliver local services and all of that? A lot of pushback to that from all kinds of political stripes, saying, look, he should let's judge him on what he says and does rather than on his age. But I think a lot of people might think, not so sure about that, Chris. Leading a council at 18, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. So I think, yeah, that's very young to be leading that. But it's interesting. I mean, I'm consistent on this thing. I believe that is too young. Although Pete the Younger was very not that much older than that when he was Prime Minister. But I do
quite different times, but yeah,
different time. Yeah. But I believe that's a bit young. I believe that we shouldn't lower the vote to 16. I believe that perhaps even the Labour MP who was 22, that's also a very young age to be an MP. So I'm consistent on these things, but I do see like the same people from your party and from Labour and from the left in general sort of say, tweet in absolute horror about what's happening and saying how awful this is and how incompetent Reform UK, whilst at the same time in previous days saying that, we need to attract more young people into politics, or we need to lower the votes to 16. Isn't it great that Labour's got this great young sort of MP? So I think you guys need to be a little bit more consistent here, don't you?
Well, I mean, I support votes at 16. So, you may say that you're therefore, but I think there's a difference. I personally think that there's a difference between, and I want young people to be involved in politics. And, I think it's been great to see young people in their 20s perhaps have local cabinet positions on a council. And I think there's no reason why they can't do a good job. And maybe this guy will do a good job. And, I mean, I don't know if he's going to put himself up to be the full-time leader of the council, but if he does and he gets the support of his group, then we'll see how he does. And that would be fair enough. He would have been democratically elected into that position. But equally, I think that most people would think that they'd want a bit more experience before leading a local authority. But again, maybe I'm wrong on that.
I have to say, I'm probably contradicting myself professionally here, because I was appointed an advisor to the shadow cabinet at 21.
There you go, very young.
But I look back on that and I thought, yeah, that was very young. And even at that age, you're still trying to work things out. Basically, well, I'm still trying to work things out.
But you're right though, Chris. That a lot of advisors not necessarily that young, but a lot of advisors are quite young, aren't they? Political
Yeah,
advisors.
I would say the average person would be absolutely shocked by how young the House of Commons actually is in terms of not in terms of the MPs, but in terms of the staff. And most of the staff, I would say, are in their 20s or early 30s. Yeah, it's a very young place, and in many respects, because it's a very demanding place, you do need to have the energy of youth, but you don't have obviously the life experience of that you require when you're a bit young, when you're a bit older. But it
And
is
people,
a young place.
excuse me,
People be shocked.
and people have made the point this week, and quite rightly, that look, no matter what ideas this guy may have, the fact is that there's rules within which local authorities have to be run, and he'll take advice from officers, and it'll be fine. Don't worry. And to a certain extent, that is true. But equally, I also know that those politically in charge of the council are the ones politically in charge of the council, and unless they're suggesting doing something out with the law, then really it's for the officers to do their best to enact whatever the elected representatives want. So it's a bit of a not quite sure who wins out that way, the officers or the elected representatives. I guess really it should be the latter in most cases.
Yeah, but we'll see. It could be an exceptionally talented 18-year-old who's very sharp, and there's no reason why you can't be like that. But I would, I would agree with the majority here that it's a bit too young.
A bit young. Shall we get on to the Tories week very, very quickly? So you can tell us a bit more about this, Chris, 'cause I'm not so sure that I've personally seen this week, but the use of generic spat, what was that?
Yeah, but basically they I don't know what the origins of it, because I came in halfway through the spat basically, and
Right.
it's happened during the course of today, and basically they've generics like taking a few shots at reform, and Yusuf's been saying, well, you're not properly on the right. I've been hearing, this is Yusuf tweeting, claiming that it's sort of that people are saying that you're attacking right now, but as soon as you become leader, you're going to come back to the centre, so you're not properly on the right, kind of thing. So yeah, it's very entertaining. It's interesting. Perhaps some of the accusations that have been put towards generic there, but yeah, it's a bit of political entertainment there.
And what do you make of Kemi Badenoch? I couldn't quite get my head around this, and it just seemed to me, at least, like another one of her slightly odd positions that doesn't seem to quite make sense. Suggesting that, I think there's lots of criticism that can be made of Keir Starmer, and we've made them today in this podcast, some of them. But I don't really think you can realistically say that, oh, you've missed 2 PMQs because how dare you be at the G7 and at NATO. I personally thought that was a bit. She said, "Oh, PMQs could have been moved to Thursday." Well, no, I don't think it just seemed really odd to me, Chris. I thought it was weird what she was saying.
I don't know if you know this, Mathew, but the exact same accusation was levelled at Rishi Sunak, I think, exactly 2 years ago.
Right.
He missed
Okay.
2 PMQs, and one of them was for a NATO summit. And Chris Bryant, so there's when Sunak was up for the liaison committee, and there's this clip of Chris Bryant basically having a go at Sunak for missing 2 prime minister's questions in a row. So this whole thing it's a game. It's like when a party's in government, they say one thing, and then when they're in opposition, they say exactly the same as the previous party in opposition says. I just think it's a bit silly. I just think it's but would you not say that there is a general? I think on this occasion, yes, missing it for G7 and NATO summits, you can't really help that. But there are questions about the degree to which Starmer is in the country, is actually engaged in Parliament, is engaged as we mentioned.
Well, he hardly ever votes,
with
does
his
he?
MPs. Yeah. So there are questions. There are perhaps, although yes, the job of a prime minister is, half of it is foreign affairs and going to trips abroad and so forth. There is still a question as to how much engaged Starmer really is on domestic and parliamentary matters.
Yeah, and I think he clearly prefers the world stage, and that happens to lots of prime ministers. I think Thatcher ended up preferring the world stage as well, and so
it's interesting that the Cameron that I knew was very keen to get out of Afghanistan. Right, this was when Cameron in opposition, and he was clear to me that he wanted to focus on domestic issues as opposed to defence issues, which I think was a bit of an irritant to him, to his domestic agenda. And then what happened when he became prime minister? As soon as there was an opportunity in Libya, he really loved it, didn't he, on the world stage, and he went to Libya, didn't he, after the conflict as well. It just shows Blair was the same as well, as he
had a real change, so Blair did, didn't he, after 9/11?
Yeah.
I mean, it totally changed his premiership.
Yeah. Although to be fair, there was Kosovo.
He had done Kosovo, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and he did have an idea about foreign policy, because he was very influenced by the Bosnian War, and he considered that the Tory response to that was very slow, and so that's where part of his humanitarian zeal came from.
And also, as well, the fact that he was Labour leader just about when the dreadful situation in Rwanda was happening, and I think both President Clinton and John Major have said that one of their great regrets as leaders of their countries during that time was really sort of taking no action to prevent what happened in Rwanda. So, I mean, I think Blair obviously saw that. I was just going to say that it does make me smile a bit, the headline writers and the use of Keir Starmer's name, because you have never hear Keir and two-tier Keir, and it does rather lend itself to these things. Anything else to say on the Tories? What about Mel Stride at PMQs this week? A pretty steady performance?
Steady, I think, is probably an apt description. He's a very capable Commons performer. There's no doubt about that. He's not my cup of tea in relation to in terms of where he's positioned himself in the party. He was very much an irritant in the last couple of Tory. No, he was an irritant in terms of the Truss and the Boris premierships. But I think he's in his 60s, because I was thinking he was in his 50s, but he's actually in his 60s. So in terms of a potential leadership contender, yes, I know Donald Trump, is president and so forth, but realistically, is he really a realistic contender? He had a go. And he's well respected. I don't think he's going to set the world on fire. He's not a radical sort of Tory, and that's what people do want: authenticity and radicalism, as opposed to
just on the authenticity point, and I know we've done Labour's week, but we're talking about PMQs now. Angela Rayner. I mean, I know she's not everyone's cup of tea, but I personally quite like her, and I think she's a unique kind of voice in our politics, and I think people do think of her as an authentic kind of person, and a political personality. And I don't think it's too much of a leap to see her as Labour leader and prime minister. What do you think?
Especially when you have the fact that it's the Labour electorate that's going to be, well, if Starmer goes before the election, that's going to be electing the new prime minister. So I think it's very, very possible. Yeah, she's a good performer at prime minister's questions, in the terms that she comes out with some funny lines and clever lines. I'm not totally convinced when she's talking about policy substance, and that's perhaps where she may become unstuck. But there's no doubt that she can handle herself well at.
But I guess my point is that she's seen as authentic and natural in a way that Keir Starmer is.
I would agree with that. Yeah, and she comes across as an actual person, whereas Starmer comes across as a robot.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, talking about real people or robots, let's go on to let's go on to the Lib Dems week. That's not me being nasty about my party leader, of course not. I'd never do that.
Again,
Well,
another week. I have no idea. I have absolutely no effing clue what they've done this
oh,
week.
you almost did a
Yeah,
Donald Trump
yeah.
there, Chris. Yes, that was quite a moment this week. Yeah, well, I mean, Daisy Cooper stood in at PMQs and asked you perfectly sensible questions. But going back to what I was saying earlier on, I do think that, and I mean, whether you agree with this particular point or not isn't really the point that I'm making. I think from a Lib Dem perspective, I would have expected them to have come out at the earliest opportunity saying that whilst of course we don't support Iran and whilst of course we don't think that Iran should get nuclear weapons, that we oppose another American misadventure in the Middle East. And it didn't happen. And to my knowledge, our party has still not actually said whether or not it supports those strikes. And I said in my bit for good old Lib Dem Voice this week that we had this really weird thing, Chris, where the party was demanding that Keir Starmer came to the Commons and make a statement, and yet I put what was our response going to be? This thing has happened, and not quite sure what we think about it, and diplomacy. I mean, I just think we make ourselves look a wee bit ridiculous when we're demanding that the PM comes to the Commons, but we ourselves haven't set out what our stall is.
Yeah, but I mean, I would agree with that, with the obvious difference that I was very much supportive of the strikes, and also it speaks to this idea that the Lib Dems like say one thing in opposition and then do the opposite in government, and foreign affairs is like that. They were opposed to Iraq. But then they were part of the government that formed. I think it was that formed the response to ISIS. So in that sense, but we don't have time to get into the politics of the strikes. But I think this was an example where ultimately we had sort of years and years of diplomacy. But ultimately, diplomacy, in order for it to be effective, it has to be supported by force. That old expression that is often attributed to Frederick the Great, although I'm not quite sure whether he said it or not. Diplomacy without arms is like music without instruments. And the fact of the matter is, the only thing that has well and truly ensured that Iran's nuclear facilities were destroyed, and I think it's come out now that we're pretty confident to say that it's really has, that the strikes and indeed the whole campaign has really sort of done considerable damage to Iran's nuclear capability. The one thing that has achieved that has been the use of force. I would say. So I would say the Lib Dems need to be careful here. Yes, we need to ask questions whenever there's some kind of military action, but sometimes, and this was a military action. This was a time limited military action from the point of view of the United States. Donald Trump is clearly a different president in terms of his approach to this than previous presidents. He's not in favor of boots on the ground. He's in favor of very kind of time limited military actions in support of specific objectives. So I think the Lib Dems need to be a bit careful here, because you might find yourself on I don't want to say the wrong side of history, but you might find yourself on the wrong side of things.
I just want to make one political point about the Lib Dems before we finish. That despite the fact, Chris, that for the past few weeks here, we've come each week and said that there's not really much to say about the Lib Dems. I mean, maybe that in itself is a winning strategy, because actually, the latest polling this week shows the Tories getting fewer MPs than us if an election was to be held kind of tomorrow. So maybe staying out of the news is a kind of policy. I don't know.
Yeah, this actually reminds me of the 2010 campaign, where where of course you had the Nick Clegg debate. Everyone, sort of the public's like Nick Clegg, and that's, I think, largely on the basis that they didn't really know who the Lib Dems were in their policies, and immediately after that debate, us in CCHQ went into panic mode. And we basically threw the kitchen sink at the Lib Dems, who basically went through all their policies and basically told everybody how crazy they were.
And then climbed into bed with us.
That might have contributed to the disappointing result.
And then climbed into bed with us afterwards.
Yeah, yeah. We use the same briefing notes for that in order to form the coalition that negotiations.
And can I just point out, and I had this debate with the liberal reformers in my party, you know, the economic liberals, who say, "Oh, Clegg led us into government." I was like, "No, we lost seats in 2010, and of course we lost many more in 2015. So we lost seats both times." That Clegg led us into government. And it just so happened that a quirk of history that the figures enabled the Lib Dems to become part of the government. But the idea that he led us to some great success and that we strode into government, I'm afraid, is a load of old bunkum. So sorry, liberal reformers, but that's just rewriting of history. So, I mean, so where do we end up at the end of this week, Chris? Well, we clearly end up with Starmer weakened, with Labour weakened, with the government weakened. And it's going to take some turning around this tanker, isn't it? Is it possible?
Yeah, I think that there has been so many mistakes over the course of the last year, and perhaps we might want to talk more about them next week because it will be the anniversary. Next week. That it's. I think the bad impression that Starmer has created is very much cemented, and I can't see how. I mean, yes, he's got theoretically 4 years, but it's been so atrocious this last year. It's very difficult to see how he can dig himself out of this. Would you not agree?
And do you think? I absolutely agree with you, Chris. I think it's not impossible, but it's not far off from being impossible, and it needs to happen soon. Do you think that he's going to claw his way into winning this vote on Tuesday?
That's very hard to say because, as you mentioned, there is a rather sort of silly anomaly in what has been proposed, and I don't know whether what he's proposed is going to be good enough for the rebels, given that there will still be people affected by the cuts. So we'll have to see. I wouldn't want to predict that, actually. I just
no. I don't know. I can't remember if we talked about the anomaly before we actually started recording or not. So I'm just going to mention it again here in case people are wondering what I'm talking about. The anomaly is, and it's been raised by a number of people, including my party's former leader Tim Farron today, is that under the concessions that Starmer has apparently made, which has satisfied some Labour MPs, and we'll have to see how many. I personally hope not very many at all, but we'll see. Is that the current PIP claimants, they'll continue as they have been, but for new PIP claimants from next year, who may well be in the exact same situation, right, with the exact same conditions, such as Parkinson's or whatever, they will be treated much more harshly. And I think a lot of Labour MPs, we'll see how many, are going to think that is still not good enough from their perspective. That is still not good enough, and that Starmer needs to go further. The question is, how many have been convinced, or will in fact, Chris, this I don't know, I'm just speculating, or will in fact this might lead to more. I'll get this sentence correct in a second. That this might lead to other MPs saying that actually this isn't good enough. What do you reckon?
Well, you've got he's already made major concessions already, then he's already established this pattern, so they could the rebels could see blood now and say, well, what else can we get out of him? And then there's the whole question of the 2-child benefit cap. Is that under question now as well? I would assume that it is, because I can't see the same Labour MPs stomaching that either.
And so Even though it's a weird one, isn't it, Chris? Because of course I want to see these reversals. I don't support these policies, but equally at the same time, and this is where Starmer is on a sticky wicket, I'm afraid, is that whilst I want to see these reversals, also him making the reversals makes him weak. And so, in a sense, he's in a position now. He's got himself into a position. This is what we have to always remember: that he and this government have got himself and themselves into a position where even when they make these concessions, it still doesn't benefit them because they're seen as weak.
You can't blame the Tories for this one. You can't blame the Tories.
No.
That's his favourite thing. Now he's going to have to take responsibility for his own decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. So, folks, what a week. You can understand why we've gone way beyond an hour, because what a week. And obviously, it was a real big week to get through. And we've rattled through the rest of the parties because obviously there wasn't so much to say about them. Now, look, I'll repeat what Chris said at the beginning. Go back, watch and listen to the Peter Cardwell interview if you haven't. It's an absolute cracker. Please don't miss it. And we've got other guests potentially lined up. I shall say no more at the moment. Keep an eye on our Twitter, or whatever else you call it, at Political Frenemies. That is where we'll be talking about potential future guests. And please do all the internety things. Please like, please subscribe, please leave a nice review. Please tell your friends about us. Our audience is building. It takes a while, as we keep saying to you, but our figures are getting better, which is fantastic. So Chris, I'd need to lie down after that.
Yeah. It's been a absolute, a busy week. I mean, I especially need to lie down because I had yet another water cover. I mean, thankfully it's ended, but yeah, I really do need to lie down. So
me and Chris are both going to lie down in different places, I should just point out. I love that. So Chris, we'll see you next week.
Yeah, and we'll see you as well, Mathew, next week.
Well, indeed. So from Chris, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.
And from me, it's goodbye. See you next week here on Political Frenemies.